grace and mercy. We're fortunate to be gathered here tonight, and we're very fortunate, alhamdulillah, and blessed to have our visitor here, Dr. Mazen Atassi. He is visiting us from Chicago, and he actually grew up in Indiana, where he graduated with a degree in biology, and then he went on to earn his degree in naturopathic medicine from the National University of Health Sciences, and then he went on to found the Forward to Health Clinic, which is a holistic wellness clinic and an educational initiative in Chicago. And he also spent time in Jordan studying with traditional scholars. Currently, he is part of a team at the Cambridge Muslim College working to develop an Islamic psychology diploma. He is married with his 2 daughters and lives in Chicago. Bismillah, Dr. Mazen.
Assalamu alaikum. You guys hear me? Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وحبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum everybody. Thanks for having me. It's really been a pleasure to be in Portland. Never thought I'd find myself in Portland, but here I am. Alhamdulillah. It's been a really great few days, and I hope inshallah ta'ala to come back. Probably in the summer where it's more pleasant and we can get outside more and get some hikes in and so forth, inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. So we're continuing our exploration of hikmah. Hikmah is the word for Islamic medicine, or holistic medicine amongst the Muslims. Right? Some people have issue with calling it Islamic medicine because it's not really something that's rooted in as a type of tradition or teaching straight from the Prophet ﷺ. So, which is fair enough, right? And that's why I think it's actually called hikmah and not Islamic medicine otherwise. Hikmah means wisdom. Hikmah means wisdom. And the Hakim is the practitioner of hikmah medicine. And he or she is one who seeks to put everything in their proper place. Seeks to put everything in terms of their lives and their well-being at the level of body, the level of mind, the level of ruh, and so forth, their relationships, where they belong, in their proper place, inshallah ta'ala. And this is ultimately what Islam is about. You find that, and I often say, when people ask me, what is Islamic medicine or what's hikmah? I tell them, it's not the cupping, the dates and the black seed, and it's Islam, all of it. Islam, Iman, Ihsan, and then the medical aspects. All of that is part of the teaching and the transmission of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is the healing. That is the healing, that is the benefit. But today I want to zoom in a little bit more, inshallah ta'ala, on some of the more practical elements of what it means to follow the Sunnah. The practical, on-the-ground, day-to-day things. The Prophet ﷺ was concerned with, teaching us, making sure that he extended to us this knowledge of how to be well, strong, connected, and building communities that were able to sustain themselves and the message and the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because in some ways, if we're not well, if we're not strong, if we're not independent, if we're not ghani in some way, free of need, then we're a burden on other people and we're not able to really serve in our fullest capacity. And so there's a wisdom in us actually being our best, right? Someone asked the Prophet ﷺ, who is the best of men? And he said, ﷺ, مَنْ طَالَ عَمْرُهُ وَحَسَنَ عَمَلُهُ, who has a long life and has a lot of good deeds. That's the best part. And really, it's like, this work of medicine is how do we extend life? How do we optimize life and well-being for the longest time? That's really what this is about, inshallah ta'ala. And so this is something that concerns the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ was interested in this. You can find that even in Tibb al-Nabawi, which is a separate discipline. The prophetic medicine is a separate medicine from the Islamic, Greek, Yunani tradition, which is what most of the Islamic medicine tradition was rooted in, this like Greco-Arabic tradition. You find that in some way, the prophetic medicine is entirely diet-based, almost entirely diet. It's hijama, and there's some other things that he would offer, some herbs. A lot of Indian herbs were very common in Arabia. Arabia was desert; they didn't really have many herbs local, so they get like some stuff from Abyssinia. They would get things from Persia and India, and they knew their applications in some capacity. But otherwise, it's entirely food-based. Right? It's entirely food-based, which tells us a lot about the perspective of the Prophet ﷺ, how he thought about health, right? How he thought food was central, and we'll get to that inshallah ta'ala. So when we talk about living the Sunnah, we don't want it to be this legalistic thing. Of course, there's a place for fiqh and for sharia and the structure of the deen, all of that, no doubt. But within that also, there has to be some sort of flow, some sort of application that's easy, that's free-flowing, that's vital, that's vibrant, that's supple, that's bending, right? I just thought of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. We talked about the believer is like, forgot the tree exactly, but it's a tree that bends, that sways in the wind. The palm tree. Yeah, the believer is like the palm tree that bends in the wind and flexes in the wind and adapts. Where the hypocrite is the cedar tree, which is rigid. Shirk, bidah, whatever, My way is the only way. That person, a strong wind comes and they just, in one piece, they just hunker over because they're not able to adapt, they're not supple. There's no hikmah. The Prophet ﷺ, you see in his interactions that he would be asked the same question by different people and give different answers. Just because he knew what they needed. He was able to read them and their needs and give them what they needed. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's hikmah. Islam is vast. And he was able to understand that. Of course, and he's the source of all that understanding in the first place. So this is what we want to begin to embody, the art of being Muhammadan, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it relates to every facet of our lives, our diet, our hydration, our sleep, our exercise, our relationships, all of that. And to embody that, to have it something that we don't just say the narrations of, we don't just, flex our knowledge of semantically with words and stuff, but we actually embody. We bring it to life, that people feel it when they're around us, especially our family members. Which is the most challenging in some capacity because we have to keep it real at home, right? And in some way, our spouses and our family members can be, they can feel the challenge of that when it's not able to be met properly. The artifacts, the harm, when we're not able to live up to our potential. And alhamdulillah that they're there because their role is to reflect to us our blind spots. So that's part of the process anyways. Alhamdulillah. But so the Prophet ﷺ was concerned with health and afiyah. Dawu ya ibadallah. Seek healing. Seek medicine, O servants of Allah. There's a famous story of one of the ambassadors that was sent to Egypt, the Copts, and they were invited to Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ had sent the ambassador and the message. The leader of the Copts didn't want to accept it, but he didn't want to reject it either. He was kind of playing, maybe being PC about it. So he just said, give me some time and I'm sending you some gifts. So one of the things he sent the Prophet ﷺ, amongst a donkey and some clothing and some utensils and so forth, like really fine stuff from Egypt, was a physician. One of the best physicians of Egypt. And actually, the Egyptian physicians were the best physicians in the world at the time. The Greeks learned Tib from the Egyptians. The original Greeks had only a system of 3 humors. We'll talk more about that actually tomorrow. The women's, I'm not sure is that only women's or just women's, yeah. Okay. Well, in some way, the Islamic medicine was built on 4 elements or 4 humors. The Greeks only had 3. They had fire and air and water, and they didn't know about earth, or they didn't know the application of earth. They learned the earth element and the earth humor from the Egyptians, which is interesting because they were able to embody that grounding. The Egyptians grounded the medicine fully. But so this person sent a doctor to Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ accepted all the gifts. And the doctor, he said, listen, there's no use for you here, but you're welcome to stay. So he stayed for a year. And after a year, he came to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, what is going on here? I've been here for a year. I've never been amongst any people in my life. I've studied people for a living. No one gets sick here. What is it? What's the sir? What's the secret? And then the Prophet said, what was his response? Verily, we are people who eat, but not to excess. We are people that eat, but not to excess. We just keep it light. We're able to avert all illness. SubhanAllah. So the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, his way, his manner, was a manual of learning how to earn the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala and how to be in your best constitution, your best self. One more piece about the hikmah medicine perspective, which is so important and which differentiates also it from other systems, is the scope that it holds for the human being. Other systems of medicine, more physicalist, more materialist, chemical-based systems of medicine, are concerned with your well-being for 10 years, 20 years, 60 years, 70 years of your life. After that, I can't help you. I can't help you for what's beyond, if there is even a beyond. What's interesting about our perspective is that we are looking at people and their well-being and their health status and concerned about it for infinity, forever. What's your well-being? What's your health status in 50 million years? The Hakim, just like the Mashayikh, the ulama, these are people that are concerned by that. It's not something that is just merely looking at 60 years of joint-free or pain-free joints and so forth. Are you well on Qiyamah, after Qiyamah? That's what we're concerned with, right? And that's something that is beyond just the food and beyond just the chemical digestion that happens in your intestines. Like, we're looking at how the food helps you earn the pleasure of Allah. And one of my teachers in Chicago, Dr. Amr Farouk Abdullah, said, good character, which is the height of ihsan, the height of spirituality, it's good character, it's the fruit, begins in the stomach, which is hikmah. And that's hikmah. That's a perspective that we need to come back to. And that was a perspective of the Sahaba themselves, no doubt. Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said the first bid'ah that happened in the time following the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was people filling their stomachs. That's the first bid'ah. Sahaba filling their stomachs more. She saw that as like, ooh, this is a bad innovation. Yeah. So these are things that we want to be able to become conscious of, become aware of the implications of our not practicing, and learning what resources are available to us to be able to make headway in that journey of optimizing our well-being at the level of the jism, the level of the nafs, the level of the ruh, inshaAllah ta'ala. Because health is health. This is actually the word in English. Health comes from the Old Saxon word health, which means whole. To be health is to be whole, one. Even though you're a composite of 3 parts, there's a oneness that can come out of this. And this is what Imam al-Ghazali talks about. There's 3 types of tawheed. There's a oneness of Allah, there's a oneness of creation, and there's a oneness of the human being that we have to optimize. And when it's healthy, there's a type of seamlessness, a type of integrative flow that is easy. And the Prophet ﷺ was free-flowing in his nature, and you see that in his interactions with people. And really healthy people, you see that as well, that their interactions are easy and light, they're easy to be around. They're not heavy people, burning people. And you find that they're actually expressive, for example, as well. You find people that they're able to express with emotions on their faces and receive feedback, and their body language and their eye contact and all these types of things express beyond just the words. There's depth to them. There's a presence to them. That's health. A type of hudur, a type of aliveness, a wholeness that comes in. And that's so vital, because that speaks volumes. Someone comes who's barely breathing, drooling at the mouth, talking about La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, follow our way, the way of everlasting life. It's like, it looks like a zombie, you know. I'm not sure about everlasting life with you. But when there's someone who's vital, who's healthy, strong, it's different, you know. And this is what you see in the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Sahaba, these were men. And the Sahabiyat were women. I'm assuming this is the women streaming, maybe not. But, you know, the Sahabiyat were real women. And there was a type of genuineness to their state. That they were real. And they kept it 100, as they said. Right? And so in some way, there's 3 takeaways that I want to touch upon today. One is diet, and its opposite, which is fasting. Movement and rest. And then 3 is connection. Connection. And there's 3 levels of connection we'll talk about, inshallah ta'ala. Just so I'm not losing track of time, what time are we going to today? Inshallah ta'ala. Is there?
7:30 or 7:45.
So we're good to go?
Yeah.
Until I'm done? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Fajr? Maybe not that long, but we can. Bismillah. We'll see. Tawfiq is with Allah. So starting with diet. They say 80% of healthcare problems are associated with diet now. And you find that in all the teachings of all the different systems of medicine, all over the world, there was this consistent message. The stomach is the cause of all illness. That's Hippocrates said that, the father of the Greek medicine. There's a statement often attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. It's a weak attribution. I found it attested by the Hakim. His name is Harith ibn Kalda, great Arabian Hakim of the 9th century. He said, "Al-ma'datu baytu da, wal-himyatu ra'su dawa." That the stomach is the house of illness. Al-ma'datu, the stomach, baytu da, the stomach of disease. Wal-himyatu ra'su dawa. And the himya, which is the restrictive regimen, the fasting regimen, the prescriptive fast, is the best of all treatments. Again, you know, these are things that are understood. And you find even in the time, in the exchange between the Prophet ﷺ and Sayyidina Mu'adh bin Jabal, where Sayyidina Mu'adh was talking about wanting his dua to be mustajab. He wanted, Ya Rasulullah, how do I make my dua mustajab? The Prophet ﷺ said, أطب مطعمك تكون مستجاب الدعوة. أطب مطعمك, make tayyib what you eat, and you will become تكون مستجاب الدعوة, and you will become someone whose prayers are answered. Doesn't get more clear than that. That connection, right? That connection between what you eat and your state with Allah. I mean, you are what you eat. Ibn Qayyim states that in his version of Tibb al-Nabawi. You are what you eat. It becomes part of you. All the food, all the molecules and the proteins and the fats and the enzymes, all of that become part of you. And really, in some way, those things are essential nutrients that they furnish the essential nourishment for all the physiological, biochemical processes of the body. But also there's something else. When something's tayyib, something's wholesome, pure, not just halal even, like when meat is tayyib, a little bit beyond halal, not just someone says Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, but there's like concern for the well-being of the animal, the sharpening of the blade, right? The animal lived a healthy life, grazing pastures that were not sprayed with pesticides, and they saw the sun, and they weren't tortured before they killed, so on and so forth. That there's something of another element, a subtle element of barakah, we can say, that affects our souls, that brings us closer to Allah Ta'ala. So this is something so vital, I mean, people don't talk about this enough. That people talk about the need for dua and tawbah and dhikr and Quran and tilawah and tahajjud. Of course, 100%. And atib mat'amak. Atib mat'amak, all of us. Make tayyib what you eat. This was something so important to the Prophet ﷺ. It's like it's better to eat less and have high quality than to eat all this food and it just be just harmful, odious. إن الله كتب على المسلمين كما كتب على المرسلين. Allah has enjoined upon the believers what He enjoined on the messengers. يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات وَاعْمَلُوا صالحا. Oh you messengers, أيها الرسل, the best of creation. كلوا من الطيبات وَاعْمَلُوا صالحا. Eat from the tayyibat and do righteous actions. What comes first? Eat from the tayyib and then do good actions. Get the fuel right. You don't put 93 octane. You don't put 87 octane into a Porsche that needs 95 octane or whatever, right? You don't put that. You put the best. You're a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or what beyond that. I mean, you need the best food. As human beings, you're Bani Adam, you're Khalifa of Allah Ta'ala. And remember, a lot of this food now that they're talking about being organic and being farm to table and this and that, that's just normal food. It's not a marketing, they'll say, there's conventional and then there's the organic, you pay extra for. Well, the conventional is GMO modified, which we'll get to in a second here, but I'm skipping ahead here. But the conventional is modified genetically, and they spray them with pesticides, and they give that to us at a cheaper rate, and it's plentiful and available, where the normal food, the original food, which is just food as Allah created it to be, is called organic. It's marked up 30%. And some people don't even have access to that. I mean, these are things we have to be concerned with, because it's affecting us and our children, 100%. Somebody once said to me, and I loved it, food is for the soul, and prayer is for the body. Flipping it. Food is for the soul, and prayer is for the body. So in terms of halal and tayyib then, you have the financial sourcing of it, making sure that the money that we have, that we're purchasing the food with, is halal. Inshallah ta'ala. Right? We have to have halal income. And then from there, of course, being able to buy the best food, buy the best meat. It's so important that we have the best meat. And now we know that meat that's been adulterated, animals are unwell, unhealthy, they're boosted with antibiotics and steroids to keep them alive enough to bulk them up. They have effects on, especially children, but our physiologies, even as adults. And so getting organic as much as possible is ideal. In an ideal situation, and I'll speak to the ideal because there's so many circumstances that make it challenging for us to source good quality food. One of the solutions to that, actually, inshallah ta'ala, and I see you out there are starting it, is having our own gardens, permaculture gardens. And there's somebody in Seattle named Ramis Kent who's doing this amazing regenerative permaculture, regenerative agricultural work. teaching us, reviving this old tradition of how to plant and harvest crops and sustain the land simultaneously. Because so many of our farming practices now, we end up just, forgive me, just extracting, ravaging, ravaging the earth, depleting it utterly. And it's a metaphor from what we're doing to ourselves. It's a metaphor. The way we interface with nature, with the khalq of Allah Ta'ala as khulafa, right? We are deputies, we are those invested with amana, with the responsibility to take care of creation. And this is what we do. We decimate whole ecosystems, forests, thriving forests with different trees and different birds, and different bees and bugs and animals, and just plant GMO corn to produce that high fructose corn syrup that's in all the drinks. That's giving everyone obesity and diabetes, and just wreaking havoc. So that becomes one of the great activism of our time. Wallahi. Being able to become self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and produce our own food for ourselves and our families. In the meantime, buying organic is best. And if not, there's two lists I want everyone to be aware of. One's called the Clean 15, and the other's called the Dirty Dozen. Anyone familiar with these? Yeah, good. So the Clean 15 are 15 foods. It's a list by the Environmental Working Group, EWG online. It's a great website. 15 foods that you don't have to buy organic, because either by nature they are not affected as much, or they're not sprayed as much. Things with thick skin, like a watermelon or oranges, bananas, these things, right? And then the Dirty Dozen are 12 foods that we really should be having organic at the minimum, because they're either heavily sprayed or highly affected by the spraying. Things like strawberries and blueberries and certain types of greens and so forth. Those are two lists. If we can't do fully organic, which can be difficult for all of us, at least starting to become conscious of these things. Taking these lists to the market and seeing what we can do with that. Because in some way, things can be halal and not tayyib, but things cannot be tayyib and not halal. Tayyib is another level to it. We have to establish halal. Alhamdulillah, I think we've done a good job as an ummah doing that. Right? Like thus far, we know what's halal. We have to work on ourselves. And that's defining tayyib and making it available. It can't be just this abstract conversation that we're having. It has to be something that we're making available to people. And quality becomes something, right? Just speaking to quality over quantity. There's a barakah when things, for example, are prepared at the house. There's a barakah, for example, when people prepare food and they're making dhikr over it. Salawat on the Prophet. They're making intention to nourish the people they're feeding at a deeper level than just proteins and fats and so forth. To nourish them. Right? Because we eat now and we're malnourished. And oftentimes people that eat compulsively, they're trying to get full, they're trying to get satiated at that deeper level, and they're not able to. Because the quality is not there. There's no barakah. It's like you have a nice meal with someone, you don't need much. It's a nice meal, you've been invited over, you're sharing from the same plate, which is the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's a tayyib meal, and there's intention that's cooked over it. You get full quick. And actually what's amazing is that you can actually end up eating more and not get full from it either. A dual kind of benefit. You get full quick, but then you can overeat and not feel heavy. This is the barakah of eating with your brothers, of visiting one another and feeding people. Amazing sunnah. And that's actually one of the sunnahs, is actually to not eat alone. I remember one time I was in Jordan for some time, and when I first got there, it was Eid al-Adha, and we had done 2 cows and 45 sheep, and I was working the circuits the whole day, mashallah. At some point, we had dinner. It was fresh lamb, just literally off the hook into the oven, and roasted potatoes and veggies and all this, and everyone had their own little plate. Just overwhelming amount of food on each plate. And I'm sitting there about to just smash, I was so hungry. And I'm sitting there, and my friend next to me goes, "Hey man, come eat with me." And I was like, very American of me, I was like, "Man, I got my food, man. You eat your food, I eat my food. What's the problem?" He's like, No. We'll eat my plate together for the barakah, and then we'll eat your plate together. And wallah, it was amazing meal. And we both ate to our fill and beyond, but it was a special meal. And I remember I learned something of the Sunnah there. I knew that hadith, but I just did I chalk it up to my Americanness, just. But people, they used to eat, and like in Saudi, you see this a lot too. People will just dig in a big pot of rice and just go in there. Which is, the Sahaba used to share their siwak. And they weren't germaphobes. That's a different conversation. But they were people that, they were connected, they were loving, and, they engaged life together. Even there's a story of Sayyidina Muhammad eating with Sayyidina Umar and Sayyidina Aisha. And from one plate. And Sayyidina Umar was upset because his hand, he's talking with the Prophet and his hand kept touching and grazing Sayyidina Aisha's hand by accident. He got upset, "Ya Rasulullah, can I get my own plate? Or can she eat by herself? Like, come on." He was like, and the Prophet said, "Just eat, man. Just eat." SubhanAllah. Isn't that amazing? So just different level, just different. We can learn so much from these things. I'm not saying go and freaking touch your friend's wife's hand when you're eating and stuff, but there's something to that. I don't know exactly how to define it, but there's something there. Right? Just that ease of being. Just not being formal and rigid and just subhanAllah. Also speaks to Sayyidina Umar, it's just him, So the whole food diet, right? I tell people in general what kind of diet you should have is a whole food diet. Whole food diet. You should be eating foods that if you leave out on the countertop for 2 days become moldy. Nothing bagged, processed. You can get these things, it's not a problem. But the majority of your intake of food should be from whole foods. Fruits, vegetables, meat, dairy, whole grain bread. Ideally like a sourdough bread that's fermented. Organic bread that's not sprayed with glyphosate, pesticides and so forth. These are ideal. But that's the level of, that's what we should do. It's not just keto, and some people can use those types of things when they're medically indicated and they're, under the watchful eye of a specialist and so forth, and those things can be good. I personally run food intolerance to some people. I check for what foods people can't digest genetically. So by removing them, we optimize the gut and digestion and so forth. But otherwise, I encourage everybody, just whole food, get the best food possible, and cook your own meals. And one of the things I tell people to do is when you're at the grocery store, and every grocery store set up like this, basically. It's like a psychological thing. They've worked it out psychologically. You have, when you first walk in, it's like the produce section, right? It's kind of like on the corner or the side of the store. You have all the produce, and then as you walk along the wall, it's like the bakery, right? And then you have the butcher, the meat in the corner, and on the back wall you have the milk, the fridges, right? The eggs and the butter and the milk and all that. So that kind of L shape is basically what you should be getting 90% of your food from. Just shop the perimeter. And then you have all in the middle, these endless shelves of boxed, canned, bagged, processed foods. Right? We can go in there and get rice and get the spices and whatever, but the majority of the food should be from the perimeter. Shop the perimeter of these places. Because you'll see that they all set them up in the same way. And you get lost in these aisles. Endless options of cookies and crackers and cereals and sugary drinks and so forth. So that's something I tell people is like a little hack, a little health hack. Shop the perimeter. And decrease sugar. I mean, this is something that I think we should speak to, right? Because sugar is so ubiquitous now. It's just everywhere. It's in everything. They've added it to food products, to drinks, to juices, I mean, it's in everything now to make it more palatable. But in some regard, it's killing us, right? And I think of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, the hadith where he was, at some point, there was a type of, economic embargo on Medina, and it was weeks where the Prophet ﷺ would not have a fire cooking, a fire on in his home. And they would ask him, what were you eating in this time, Ya Rasulullah? And he would say, Al-Aswadan, or Al-Aswadain, the two black things. And what did he mean by that? The two black things. Water and dates. Water and dates. And now, in this day, we've lost the hikmah of Al-Aswadan, and we have Al-Abyadan, the two white things. What are the two white things that are killing us? Sugar and flour. Yeah. So salt's actually very good for us, but in moderation, of course. Everything in moderation. But it's these processed wheat and the processed sugar. Keyword processed, right? If you have natural sugars and fruit and so forth, these things are not. Honey, maple syrup, these things are fine. These are beautiful. Even dates themselves, I mean, they're very sweet. But even the way that the date, for example, is digested in the stomach, you have these enzymes eating away at the date in the stomach. It's like a little ball of sugar sitting right here. And then you have enzymes that's coming and eating away, and then it just kind of, just a slight, slow kind of release of sugar into the bloodstream, right? So it doesn't spike your insulin and all that. You have good energy. I mean, if you have a few days for suhoor, you'd be surprised. I mean, alhamdulillah, like, I'm sure people have a little bit of date, some water, maybe some oatmeal or something, and you'll go the whole day without getting hungry, even these long days, becoming shorter days. But sugar, when you have a Dr. Pepper or whatever, 45 grams of sugar, it just explodes in your blood. It just explodes. It's a huge sugar spike. And you have this insulin response. And so these are things that are anti-fitra. They're not natural. They don't work in the natural way that other sugars do. Sugars are fine. We don't have a problem with natural sugars. It's these processed sugars that are reduced to their common denominator of glucose. And it just, literally, it's like an explosion of sugar in the blood. That does not happen if you have a fruit, you have an apple with fiber and stuff like that, that helps kind of slow down that digestion and make it like a time release, kind of a slow time release of sugar. Yeah? So, al-abyadan, avoiding al-abyadan. Shopping the perimeter, organic, and the two lists. Shopping the perimeter, whole foods, and avoiding al-abyadan. These are things that are so important. Also, one of the hadith, one of the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ is don't mix fruit and meat. Fruit and meat are things to be avoided. That's something in Tib al-Nabawi as well, or in Tib Yunani and Tib al-Nabawi. There's narrations, don't mix meat and fruit. And now we know in some way they put burden on the liver. Allahu A'lam. So what to eat in general, organic, right? Like we said, vegetables, really plant-based. I encourage a plant-based diet, not vegan, not vegetarian. I encourage eggs, I encourage good quality meat. But just plant-based. The basis of your diet should be plants, and assorted plants, and local and seasonal, ideally, right? Also, beyond that, eating what we may know our ancestors to have eaten. Right? That may be a struggle for some of us, that we don't know exactly, or there's so much admixing of our forefathers that we don't actually know what our foreparents were eating 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. But these are things that, if we come from indigenous areas of some locale, we can begin to kind of be curious about. Or even asking, like, I didn't have a chance to ask my grandparents, but asking like my grandparents, I wish I would have had the opportunity. What did your grandparents eat? What did you see them eating? That would have been really interesting to me. Yeah. And also healthy fats. I encourage healthy fats. So like organic butter, and ghee, and olive oil. These are great foods to have in general. Right now, there are certain health conditions, and ideally these things are individualized. But in general, healthy people, they need and tolerate animal fats. The heart itself functions. The energy of the heart is saturated fats. The one thing that we're told not to have. The actual muscle of the heart is fed on saturated fats. So it's an interesting kind of dilemma when you're limiting saturated fats, but the fuel source of the organ that you're trying to protect is saturated fats. So these are things. Fish, I encourage fish. I encourage fermented foods. You'll find in every tradition, every nation, whether they were coastal, whether they were seaside, whether they were agrarian, whether they were living in the Arctic, whether they were mountain people, that they had some sort of fermented foods. If you're interested in learning more about kind of the sociological kind of history of food, you can read this person's book. His name is Weston Price. He's actually a dentist. Dr. Weston Price, are you familiar? Yeah? Weston Price was a dentist who lived in the early 20th century. And he wanted to study diet's effects on teeth. He was a dentist and then like a researcher. So what he did is he traveled the whole world in the early 20th century. Started off in the Swiss Alps. He went throughout to like Scotland, Ireland, went up to the Arctic, people with the Eskimos, and lived with them. He went to Africa, he went to Papua New Guinea, he went to Australia, he went all over the world and studied people and took pictures of their tribes and their peoples, took pictures of their teeth, counted cavities, and assessed their bone health, like jaw health and bone structure and so forth, and studied their diets and what they were eating. And he found that basically every people got everything they needed in some way or other, whether they were coastal or whether they were mountain people or whether they were agrarian people, that they all had fermented foods, they all had access to animal fats, they all had access to certain plants or fruits and herbs and stuff that were local, that were helpful. Basically, he found every people covered their bases. Allah sent every people everything they needed, which is amazing. And one of the things he talked about a lot was fermented foods. Every people had fermented foods. Even the Eskimos, they would take fish eggs, what we call caviar, and they'd keep them in these barrels and ferment them for months. And they were like a superfood. It was like a medicine that they would give for the elderly, for the sick, for the pregnant women to build healthy babies, for the children to develop properly. These 4 categories of people were privileged with the fermented caviar because they knew this was a superfood. This is something that builds the microbiome, it builds this healthy protein, there's good fats in here, there's enzymes that are specific to growth and development, and so it's amazing. I mean, you find people in the mountains also similarly have the same thing. They pickle certain things. Like anyone familiar with sauerkraut? Sauerkraut, you have, which is like an Eastern European fermented cabbage. Then you have kimchi in Korea, which is a Napa cabbage, kind of spicy. And I encourage people to have these things regularly and get different brands of them. So you go to Whole Foods or something, or Trader Joe's or whatever you guys have here, and buy different sauerkrauts. Each one has a different culture, different types of bacteria that are helpful to you. So have them with your eggs, have them with your breakfast, have them as a snack. You can put them in your soups. Now it's time for soups, not in the winter time. This is more time for warming foods, not really time for dairy. This is a season of winter, of water is the element, cold and wet is the quality. So we want to do hot and dry foods, which are a lot of warming, like spices like ginger and cardamom and cinnamon and onion and garlic and so forth. Warming principal foods. And soups and stews and stuff like that. Animal meat, vegetables, that's kind of what we should be eating now. But adding fermented foods to them, somehow. This is a great practice. And getting our kids on it is really important too. Because once they learn how to, like my kids, alhamdulillah, like they didn't even learn to say yuck to it because this is what they got from the first time they could eat. So they're eating, I have them having cod liver oil. I have adults, I have adults taking 1 tablespoon of cod liver oil, like, I can't take it, it's so blah. Like, I have a 3-year-old that just gets excited when I bring it out of the fridge, So don't give me that nonsense. But cod liver oil is another big one. And that's something that was used in was it something that was common? I've read and heard that maybe 50, 60 years ago in America, everyone knew cod liver oil.
Cod liver oil was very, very popular.
Yeah, very popular.
I remember it.
MashaAllah. I really encourage that. 1 tablespoon a day. Or 2 teaspoons, 1 tablespoon a day.
Yeah, we used to have to take it.
It's a powerful food. It's a powerful food. Also organ meats. Organ meats were one of those specialized foods that people would keep for the special people that needed it. Like for example, liver. Liver is the storehouse of nutrients in the body. The body doesn't keep all the nutrients floating in the blood at all times. It stores it for when there's need. Where does it store those extra nutrients? In the liver. Allahu Akbar. Liver is good. It's an acquired taste, but it's good. And I encourage people, wallahi, with the kiddos especially, once a week. And oftentimes you can find it really cheap because the butchers don't sell it. So it's like, I've gotten given to me for free before. But if not, it's just at discount because just like, I throw it out. Like, no, don't throw it out. Give me that. I'll take that. Like, if you go to the people that do udhiyah on Eid day, you can probably collect 50 livers if you want. Because people just take out all the entrails and toss it out. It's like, whoa, hold on, wait a second. There's some great stuff in there. So the liver is excellent. I really encourage liver, especially for people suffering with chronic issues, especially for pregnant women. Build strong babies. I encourage liver once a week, for sure. For sure. Also bone broth. All these old these things that we all, our parents knew this, our grandparents knew these things. We've lost them. Bone broth. People would share bones, like neighbors would share, like in Syria, we had people share bones to make broths. In times, especially when it was difficult, they so honored the bone broth that they would share it. It was like a sadaqah. Like, you don't have bones here, take my bones and use them and make some broth and give back to me. Yeah. All right. So that's food. Fasting. Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Sumu tasihhu. Fast and you will be well. Right? And then ma'datu baytu da' wal hamyatu ra'su dawa, that there's a fasting regimen, that there's something about fasting, withholding of intake, that stimulates healing. And now we know that people talking about intermittent fasting and how they're reversing their arthritis and they're reversing their autoimmune issues and inflammatory disorders and so forth by not eating for 18 hours a day, ceasing any intake, and allowing something else to take over. What takes over? We have a self-healing mechanism in the body. Allah Ta'ala gave us this ruh that's in the body, that's intelligent, that's vitally aware of the entire condition of the body. That when you cut the body, immediately there's inflammation, becomes red, becomes swollen, there's pain, and then you see the blood, the body's shunting blood there to clean it up, to seal it up, to make sure that, everything goes back to normal. And you'll find that when it does, the clotting factors come and it'll just seal it enough to kind of close off the wound. It won't build this huge scab or anything. It won't keep it open. It'll just close it enough, and then everything goes back to normal. It's intelligence. You eat something and immediately your stomach starts secreting enzymes and gastric juices and acid and so forth to break it down, and then everything's being assimilated in the small intestine and then going to different parts of the body where it's needed, and if not, it's going to storage. What is that? What is that? That's the intelligence in the body. And there's something that even connects with our immune systems and our self-healing mechanisms when we fast, using that same kind of process. Right? And so there's something, we call this, in medicine, call this the vital force. And the Hakims would call it al-ruh al-haywani, the animal spirit or the animal kind of faculty that governed the animal nature, that kept it in check, kept it organized. So these are things that we can do to optimize that. Fasting was one of the best things to do that. And there's different types of fasting, of course, right? There's like 12-hour fasting, we call that time-restricted fasting. There's intermittent fasting. There's the shar'i fast that we have, right, which is a specific type of dry fasting. We don't drink and eat anything. But intermittent fasting, the mainstream one now, is that it's a wet fast. So you can drink whatever you want. That doesn't have calories. So water, coffee, and tea, basically. And just avoid eating food for 18 hours. That's a wet fast. So there's different types of fasting. The fast that I give people is by taking out their food intolerances. And I keep that kind of as a basic kind of fast for them, individualized fast for them. There's many different types of fasting. And in some way, this lightening of the diet is what allows the ruh to soar. I mean, people feel this in Ramadan when they're not eating. You feel like you would imagine you're more tired and sluggish. You're actually energetic. You're actually up for tahajjud. You're up for taraweeh and tahajjud. You're doing things. Your work's more productive. What is that? Right? There's something that's not being bogged down as much. Yeah. So much of our energy becomes utilized for digestion when we eat. All this energy that we could be using for creative endeavors, for work, for ibadah, for whatever, gets sucked and utilized for digestion and assimilation and elimination. So much of our energy. 70% I've read. So in some capacity, we all have to, even outside of Ramadan, be practicing some sort of fasting. I really encourage that. I mean, think of the Sahaba, where the Prophet ﷺ was trying to entice them with Jannah. He said, can you imagine in Jannah where you'll have 2 meals a day? And they're like, Ya Rasulullah, say it ain't so. Indeed, 2 meals a day. Allahu Akbar, 2 consistent meals a day? That is Jannah. What do we say to that? I mean, that hadith doesn't even register. We're laughing about it. It's like it doesn't, There's something about withholding food. Withholding food. That's so important for us in this time. So I'm being aware of time here as well. So movement. Al-harakatu baraka. Movement is baraka. Right? There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that there's 360 joints in the body. You owe them each a haqq. You owe each of your joints a haqq every single day. To move them, to use them for khair, for ibadah, for khidmah, for service. Movement is a function and a feature of life. Someone who's not doing so well isn't able to move. He or she is laying in bed, comatose, unable to do anything for themselves. Where the healthy, a healthy youthful person, they're bouncing off the walls. A young child, they're bouncing off the walls. It's a sign of health, of vitality. And embodiment, being in the body and moving, is a part of the Sunnah. Right? We're not just cerebral people. The believers are not cerebral. We're people of action, of amal, ilm and amal, movement, action, good action. So there's a type of actualization and a type of embodiment. That's so important. And strength, even. We'll say strength. Say it clearly. The Sahaba were strong. Like way stronger than we think they were. If you go to Topkapi in Istanbul, the museum there, you see the swords of the Sahaba. Have you seen those things? Yeah. Anyone seen them?
Huge.
Unbelievable. And the sword of Sayyidina Ali. Just unbelievable. But remember, this is the man, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who ripped the doors off of Khaybar. And it's said that Sayyidina Umar, who, Allahu Alam, they say he was 8 feet tall. Huge. 8 feet tall. He could, just to show you his athletic prowess, he could take this foot, right, and then jump this foot through here onto a horse. That's to show you his agility. He could go like this, right? I can even, look at me, I'm taking the wall, onto a horse. That was, they were athletic. They were people of azima, of physicality, of strength. They would wrestle for fun. They'd shoot arrows between Fajr and Maghrib, and the Prophet told them, you're in Jannah. When you're walking between the targets, you're in Jannah. You're in the Rawdah min Riyad al-Jannah. It's people that were martial. There was a type of manliness to them. So vital that we come back to that. And there's a connection between all of that and the spirit. And any good spiritual practice, or any good martial practice, has a tarbiyah element to it as well. And you go to like a jiu-jitsu gym or wrestling gym, and there's adab there. There's a lot of respect people have for one another there. They're choking each other out, and then afterwards they tap and they hug and they give respect. There's something very deep with that. On the verge of death. I mean, you tap and then you submit. A type of learned submission, and then the person has to release. I mean, that's brother. That's a deep connection there with somebody. When you can do that. Allahu Akbar. The Prophet ﷺ was physical. He didn't let anyone carry his firewood. Same with Sayyidina Umar. He had the sacks of wheat and Mu'mineen, have us carry that for you. You're the Khalifa. Will you carry my sins on the Day of Judgment? No, I gotta do this. They were just people that just did their own. They would do their own. المؤمن القوي خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير. That he would say, the strong believer, the Prophet ﷺ, the strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah. خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير. Stronger, better, and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer, but there's good in all. There's good in both, because they're both believers. Alhamdulillah, that's all good. But there's a daraja. There's some advantage. There's some sort of rank that the strong believer has. And qawi. Not a taqi, not the salih, not the hafiz, not the alim, al-mu'min al-hal, al-mu'min al-qawi. And you find that there's like sunnah sports. Now, people talk about the sunnah sports. Wrestling, archery, swimming, horseback riding. These are things. And they're parts of the fitrah. They connect us back to the fitrah. This inward, primal knowing of Allah, of ourselves, of what's true, of tawheed. That there's something, even the Prophet ﷺ, he would swim. And it's related that he would do sibaha, which is swimming, and na'awn, which is diving. He would dive when he was a young boy in Yathrib, visiting his family with his mother before she passed. And he would do awn. And he would say, I preferred awn. Which is really interesting, because it's like, I've heard somebody describe this, where when you dive, you're diving into a body of water, and at some moment you're just weightless. It's a type of annihilation, a type of zeroing of the self in that regard. The Prophet ﷺ preferred that over. But also, they would say the archery. Archery, the master archer doesn't see a target. They see themselves. They're aiming at themselves. They have to zero them. You cannot aim at anything beyond you. You can't focus on anything outside of you. The master archer aims totally at himself. A type of annihilation in one's focus. Totally present. And it's mentioned like Imam al-Shafi'i could write his name with arrows. Muhammad Idris al-Shafi'i with arrows. They would say that Imam Abu Hurairah, Sahabi, I can't remember the exact narration, but he would hit like 40 out of 40, or 50 out of 50, or 100 out of 100 targets in a row. And the ulama say that was a reflection of his precision in his hadith narration.
Bukhari.
Was it Bukhari?
I think they mentioned.
Allahu Akbar. Bukhari. One of the great imams of hadith. That he was a master archer. He would never miss the bullseye. And that's how he was in his transmission of the hadith. There's a connection between the two. That's the secret. Right. So the martial arts, I mean, these are things that there's, it's mentioned, and we mentioned it yesterday, there's barakah in the forelock of the horse till the end of time. And you find that now there's certain types of therapies where people will go and take troubled children with aggression issues, with this ADHD kind of attention issues, whatever. These are just troubled children, probably from troubled homes, right? And they put them in the country and have them engage with horses. And part of the actual therapy is actually putting their hand, these are not Muslims, putting their hand on the forelock of the horse. They somehow learned that, maybe they read the hadith, but they put their hand on the horse and they brush. And they give eye contact, it's the whole kind of thing. This is what I hope, inshallah ta'ala, honestly. People hold retreats and stuff like that, these knowledge retreats, and these are beautiful things, and I encourage them, obviously. But we're not lacking knowledge necessarily nowadays. We have knowledge. We should be teaching people Fard Ain, but we should be helping people translate that knowledge more into their embodied state. Helping people tend to the land, permaculture. Helping people wrestle, learn about their bodies. Like when brothers meet, they should be wrestling. They should be horseback riding. They should be swimming. They should be hiking. They should be out in the outdoors, learning to fend for themselves, learning to use their own internal guidance systems, to trust their guts, right? Just not be constantly within a bubble of our protection and so forth. There's something about that. You get choked out a little bit. It's okay. It's a good thing sometimes to learn. And there's a book called Spark. Anyone knows the book Spark by John Rady? It's a book that found out that the best thing to do before a big examination or a big project that you have or a deadline of sorts is not actually to take a Red Bull or coffee or whatever. It was actually to move your body. And they did an actual experimental study on this high school in Naperville, which is in the suburb of Chicago, where they had class 0, which was before first hour class. They had kids come half an hour early, and they would just have them do, running on the track or doing plyometrics, doing jumping jacks and whatever. They were playing basketball, whatever, doing something for half an hour before the first class. They'd come at like 7 and school starts 7:30. And then they measured these kids for the whole year in terms of their performance in school, in terms of their sociability, in terms of the mental health questionnaires that they would put out and stuff like that. Massive improvements. They went from a certain number of dropouts to almost negligible, maybe 15-20% to nothing. Everyone stayed. They ended up actually going to a global math and science kind of tournament. And usually it's like the Japanese and the Singaporeans that win these things. And that year, Naperville won. Can you believe that? Naperville won. And the only thing they changed was hour 0. Seeing people moving in their bodies before class. It's an amazing book, John Rady, Spark. Right, it turns out there's this thing called brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, that is upregulated in the brain during exercise. BDNF. And they talk about it like it's a fertilizer of the brain. It fertilizes the connections, the new connections the brain can make when this has been released. And the main thing that releases it is movement, exercise, exertion, sweating, perspiration, activity. Amazing. So people study these things. They go and study people's in the past and tell them, on average, they got 20,000 steps a day. 20,000 steps a day. Now, if you count it on yours, we're probably getting, if we're just going from here to the masjid, home, work, Probably no more than 8,000, probably. Maybe 10, if you're a little bit more intentional about it. But we're not getting anywhere near what they were doing. Never mind hauling water from the well and getting the groceries every day fresh from the market, and picking up the goat that ran out of the house because you have to bring it back to the fence, and actually fixing the fence and whatever, all these things that people were doing. So we have to be able to compensate. I don't know what that looks like exactly for us practically, but we have to be able to start thinking about it. Going to the gym, learning how to do things at home, body weight exercises. I encourage a lot of Tai Chi, Qigong, which is not exerting. You're not sweating, you're not doing anything. It's moving of your breath and moving of your body in gentle ways, but you can build up a sweat in doing it. If you do a 20-minute Qigong exercise, you could find yourself sweating. It increases body temperature. There's a secret to that. It's not all movement has to be with muscles and grunting and heavy. It doesn't have to be all that. And now, like studies show, actually the best one thing that you can do if you're type 2 diabetic. Type 2 diabetic. What's the number one best thing you can do? Walk 10,000 steps a day. That's what the studies show. That's the number one thing. Of course, taking out sugar. But the best thing to do, because the muscles uptake sugar, glucose. Muscles love sugar as energy. So if we're having sugary foods all day and not moving our muscles, all that sugar is staying in the blood. But if you're having sugar, at least, fine, go walk, and your muscles will use that as energy, as fuel, because the preferred fuel of muscle is sugar. So at least get those moving. Right? So that's what I encourage everyone, 10,000. Somehow. Get a tracker if you have one of those things. Even with mental health issues now, they're talking about, moving the body, moving the depression, moving the anxiety. People getting stuck in their minds and overthinking and stuff. They're not in their bodies. They're not moving properly. They're sitting there in bed and just ruminating and brooding. And there's likely important issues at play there that they need to be redressed and they should get help with and so forth. But one of the things I encourage people to do, I do a lot of counseling. I do a lot of emotional counseling with my patients. But one thing I tell them, though, is that you have to move your body. You must move your body. And like neurologically even now we know that when you have this pattern of not moving, you can begin to kind of change the neural patterning, the neural firing pattern of the brain by just incorporating a little bit of something new. That's okay, fine. You're not going to go out and go for a jog when you're depressed in bed. But go up and down the stairs. Go down the stairs and come up the stairs intentionally. And that becomes something that you just take one step further and rewiring the brain. And then the next time is, okay, I'm going to do that and do jumping jacks. And eventually you can begin to slowly incorporate so much more movement that you're not going to be in bed brooding at all anymore. Alaykum salam. So these are things, sprinting, body weight exercises, kettlebells, going to the gym. Even working in the garden can be a workout. Watch your back, you should be bending with your knees and so forth. But these are workouts. Lifting the fertilizer bags and putting them, it's a workout. Just being engaged, finding something that you love. Doesn't have to be in the gym, lifting weights with people that are half naked. You don't have to necessarily do that. But engage with life somehow. Find something that you like doing. Put your hands in the earth if you can. Go hiking. You have amazing hikes here. You should be going hiking as often as you can. I know it's wintertime, but eventually engaging as much as you can. Even there's something called forest bathing. Has anyone heard of this forest bathing? Shirin-yoku, where one of the practices of the Japanese is actually just to go and be mindfully conscious of the forest as you're walking through it. No, you don't have any specific technique or any specific chant or anything. Just becoming totally present of the sounds and the smells and the textures and the odors and the feel of the forest as you walk through it. of the leaves crunching and the sounds and the birds and the wind passing through the trees, and trees make different sounds if you listen to it. Different trees make different sounds when the air passes through them. Listening for that. Different birds calling. Becoming fully present of that. Because nature remembers Allah constantly. Nature is a creation of Allah Ta'ala, has its own tasbih, has its own dhikr. And when we are in nature, we begin to resonate with that. Like it's like a group dhikr. And there's something about that, wallahi. There's something about being in nature that reminds us of Allah Ta'ala. Isn't it? When you're like in the mountains or something, it's just Allah Akbar. It just comes so easy. It's not going to come in the cities. I'm in Chicago. I'm not going to be downtown saying, Allahu Akbar, these amazing. I mean, maybe, if it's the first time ever seeing buildings and stuff. But I'm not fazed by that. I'm more impressed by nature. Something beautiful of Allah's creation. But there's something about that, being in nature, and it's like, it reminds us of Allah Ta'ala. So these are things. These are things I totally encourage people. And the Prophet ﷺ was engaged with nature. I mean, we know the stories of how the stones would pass salams to him before his nubuwah. You had animals coming and complaining to the Prophet ﷺ. You had trees that were weeping at the loss of his proximity. And that is haqq. And that is a sunnah. It's mutawatir hadith. So we can't reject that hadith. A tree actually yelled and yelped and wept in front of a whole group of Sahaba because someone built him a mimbar. And he wasn't leaning on the tree anymore. He was standing on one of these. There was an interfacing with nature. Nature responded to him. And we need to be able to come back to that kind of dynamic relationship with creation. Because it goes right back to Allah Ta'ala. You don't engage with creation at that level and forget Allah. Because you see everything is the khalq of Allah. Everything stamped with La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And it brings us back. It gathers us internally. And this is perhaps one of the greatest features of the prophetic healing. It's tawheed. It brings us back to connection with our Creator, which is the best medicine that I know. Especially in a time of anxiety and depression and people not having despair in their lives. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah answers all of those questions. And it becomes a worldview that once you incorporate Allahu Akbar, it becomes a remedy to every ailment. Part of our work, honestly, I really believe this. Like, we're the last group calling to fitrah. We're the last group calling to fitrah. We have to be able to talk about nature and honoring nature because they're destroying it. Every year, more and more land, more and more of the rainforest. Look at the global, warming problem that we have, the pollution issues that we're having. The water has been compromised, the air has been compromised, the soil has been ravaged. What's left? This would never happen in a Muslim ummah that was strong and able to operationalize its principles on the ground. It would never do that. And in fact, our scholars tell us in Muslim Spain, they had the capacity, the technology, the wherewithal to develop a civilization much more scientifically or technologically more advanced as they did. They chose not to. They chose not to because they didn't want to thwart the balance. وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ. And establish the weight, the scale with justice, and don't transgress the balance. Surah Al-Rahman. There was a type of balance that they found that they struck, and if we bring in more technology, and what's technology back then? Like more, I don't know, pulleys and gears, not like what we have now. But they're like, no, that's too much. We're gonna stop here. We have, alhamdulillah, we have water coming in. We have these aqueducts, we have these beautiful gardens, we have outhouses, we have sewage systems, we have architecture that we can give the adhan and the whole masjid can hear because we know the science of resonance and so forth. There's no need for mics, there's no need for technology, there's no need for... We got what we need. Everyone's living in harmony with fitrah and doing what they need to do here, which is worship Allah and serve creation and cultivate their soul. What more do you want? It wasn't about progress for progress's sake. Here, we're in a culture that is headed for the cliff at 100 miles per hour because they can't stop. They're compulsively wanting to grow with finite resources, even while they're destroying the world that they're a part of. So now they're talking about going to Mars. Like, see guys, sorry, it didn't work out. We're going to be leaving to Mars. Good luck. Building spaceships. SubhanAllah. No, with movement we have to talk about rest. It's talking about the opposite of movement. Non-movement. Stillness. Sakina. Being at peace. We talk about the nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. These are both branches of what they call the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic is the go, activity, fight, flight, doing, outwardly oriented to the world, engaged system of the body. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what we call the rest and digest system, the intimacy and the connection and the love and the bonding system. I call this the ibadah system. You're not supposed to be worshipping Allah when you're going outwardly oriented and just doing and focused on performance and goals and outcomes and deadlines and hectic and your body is stressed, you have cortisol in your blood. And that's not you should be at peace and rest and inwardly oriented and present with Allah Ta'ala. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system. And we don't learn how to shift gears. Oftentimes I have people that work until 10, 11 p.m. They're on their emails, doing things and answering, calls and the beckons of clients and so forth. There's no downtime. And that becomes a big problem. Because all of creation is an alternation. إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Verily in the creations, the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of night and day are signs for those of deep insight, of lub, of deep core. You understand that there's a time for this and a time for that. That when the daylight is out, when the sun's out, it's time for doing. And then when the moon comes out, time for going inwards. For changing gears a little bit. It's about resting, it's about ibadah, about hanging out with your family, playing with the kids. It should have a different different state than a state of work and making money and taking care of the needs of people and so forth. Take care of ourselves, those intimately around us. That's so important that we have that. Because people get burnt out. People get burnt out. People cannot sustain that. And their bodies begin to give up on that. The bodies begin to disintegrate. There's this book called When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. And the whole premise of the book is people that don't know or they've lost the capacity to say no for themselves. They're like always attending to people and pleasing people and taking care of people, and even if it's intentional, they do it for the sake of Allah, but it's unbalanced in some way. They don't know how to say no. I need to take care of me. I can't do that for you. Forgive me. I have 1,000 other things to do. Or you've already asked me for 10 favors. I need to maybe ask for a favor from you to leave me alone. Right? But these are things that are so important that we have. Because if not, then you get depleted. You only have so much. And Allah can fill you up and by having certain practices and certain types of rest and so forth. But if you don't, there's a type of depletion that comes. burnout, they call it. And it's real. It's a real phenomenon. People burn out all the time. I think probably most of us have experienced burnout at some point in our lives, if not right now. Burnout's real. So we have to. I mean, there's a teaching of like the Taoist in Chinese medicine, the yin and the yang, right? Then the yang is the daylight, the masculine energy, activity, and the yin is the feminine, the passive, the resting, the nourishing. Alaikum salam. We need to be able to bring in both, the yang and the yin, right? Action and rest. And this is the alternation of night and day. This is the Prophet ﷺ used to wake up at night and he used to go outside during Tahajjud every night. He'd come outside of his home and look up at the stars and recite the last 2 pages of Ali Imran, which is إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ اخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ إِلَى آخِرِهِ, to the end of the surah. And that was his tahajjud. That's how he started his tahajjud. So taking time for oneself is not a selfish thing. And if one has hikmah and they understand the nature of the balance, it's actually the most selfless thing. Because you're saying to yourself, I'm going to give me so I can continue to give you. Right? But you're giving and compulsively giving until you burn out, and then you become a burden on those around you because you're sick with God forbid with something chronic and autoimmune or whatever. It's not the way that we have to be, that we should be in the world. We have to have balance. The body has a haqq over you. الجسم له حق. The body has a haqq. So we spend and we store. We spend and we store. So I'm aware of time, and I do want to open it up to questions and engagement, so we can wrap it up there, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions? Comments? Insights? Additions?
Should I open the door for the sisters if they want to ask questions?
Can I have one of these waters there?
Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم.
Yeah.
الحمد لله.
Assalamu alaikum.
No questions? Sisters, any questions? Yeah, I see your hand. Can we get a mic, please? Or can someone, maybe, can you repeat the question, Sidi?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what is the clear difference between holistic medicine and like westernized and integrative medicine?
Western integrated medicine
Yeah.
and holistic medicine.
Yes.
Good question. So holistic medicine is one that incorporates all 3 elements of the human being, ruh, jism, nafs. Right? So you'll find that they'll take into consideration diet, lifestyle, optimization, and then they'll use like some sort of energetic therapeutic. So they use acupuncture, homeopathy, hydrotherapy, herbs, right? But using herbs in a certain way, not just the biochemical way. Because now what you'll find in the integrative paradigm is they're coming at holistic medicine from a biochemical, pathophysiological kind of framework. So they're interested in like what chemical constituents are in the herbs, as opposed to what's the energetic effect of the herb on the totality of the human being. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because those are 2 very different ways of using herbs, for example, or food even, right? Like in Tibb al-Nabawi, the Prophet ﷺ would balance and use food energetically. If someone was too, hot and wet, he would use a cold and dry kind of principle food, and so forth. So that's what's lost, is that the vital, subtle element of the medicine. That's the main difference. I can go off on a big rant with that, but because I really feel strongly about this. But it's the main difference is called vitalism. That's really kind of my campaign nowadays. My activism is to reinstate vitalism as like the core kind of creed of holistic medicine, if you will. It's a core principle, and that's what differentiates the holistic medicine and the integrative functional medicine people. Good question, thank you. Yeah, no, please.
Over the years, I think one of the things that commonly people hear is that you should sleep 8 hours a day. I know I've led a lot more research saying now we can do 6 hours, 6.5 hours. I'm curious what you think as far as sleep hygiene and sleep schedule and what the optimal sleep schedule should be for an adult.
Good question. So it's variable because we all have different needs. We all have different... Should I repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was about what is the optimal sleep and what is this type of sleep hygiene practices that we can incorporate in our lives. Of course, just like diet, just like hydration and movement, all these things, they're variable depending on the constitution of the person. So for example, like people talk about 8 cups of water a day. But someone like, these boys here, needs different amount of water than Shaq. You know Shaq, right? Shaquille O'Neal we can't just reduce, this 8 hours a day or 8 cups of water a day. You can't do that, right? It could be like an average. But in terms of sleep, you should get enough sleep where you're waking up refreshed. That's just bottom line. At some point in your life, you might not be able to do that. And so finding ways of optimizing the quality of the sleep, which is the sleep hygiene piece, and maybe having a nap in the day or something, to accommodate that or compensate for that is best. But we should be getting as much sleep as we need in the night. And that really means sleeping when the sun goes down, ideally. Because imagine if we didn't have these lights on right now. We'd probably be huddled by a candle, reading a book and getting drowsy and maybe having some tea and doing the kid before bed and going to sleep. But we have these lights on and our devices and everything, and so we're staying up till 10, 11 easy. At least, right? I won't expose anybody for myself. But we all stay up, right? It's a problem. And so incorporating, part of sleep hygiene is actually when the sun goes down. I tell myself and my patients and so forth, around Isha time, 8 o'clock, you should not eat after 7. Just as a practice, I encourage people, if they can, to do intermittent fasting. So stop eating at 6:37. Have a nice meal, have a nice dinner. Enjoy your dinner, bismillah. But stop eating at 7. Pray Isha, do your thing, and then just have some tea, dim the lights, turn off the Wi-Fi router, which acts like a cell phone tower in the house, beaming EMF and electrosmog radiation, which actually is a big problem, and we don't have enough time to get into that. But I encourage people to unplug things, unplug the router, unplug their devices, wear blue light. If you're going to use your devices and you watch TV and stuff, put on blue light filtering glasses. You can buy them on Amazon for $15. The blue light stimulates cortisol. The blue sky tells our body, hey, it's daytime, here's some energy, go do stuff. Because it's daytime, you shouldn't be sleeping, right? And same with red lights and orange lights. It tells the body, oh, it's like sunset now, it's nighttime, it's not so blue anymore, it's probably time for bed, so better shift gears. So I have a salt lamp, one of those orange glow salt lamps. I put on my blue light kind of glasses at night, and I burn bukhur. I use the senses. This is one of the great ways of sleep hygiene and coming back into that parasympathetic nervous system, is using the senses. So I put on comfy clothes. I make my favorite tea, which I like lemon balm tea. Lemon balm's a nice herbal tea. It's a nice, not sedative, but helps kind of relax your nervous system and so forth. It's called lemon balm, or called Melissa officinalis is the herbal Latin name of it. I'll burn frankincense or oud. I'll apply oils. I'll get kind of not. I'm not saying this sensually, but coming into the senses is a sensual thing. Kind of coming back to the body, feeling, right? That's something that we should be doing, and helps us kind of coming out of our minds and our thinking patterns and our addictions to worrying about future and the past and the grief and the disappointments and the fear and coming back into here and just having shukr and hamd and cultivating that, reading salawat on the Prophet ﷺ, like the Dalail al-Khairat is something really beautiful to read at night. So forth. Right? These are things that I totally encourage. Having the teas. I encourage people to have baths. If you want to have like a nice hot bath, you can put Epsom salt in them. If not, you can put even one of those plastic containers and soak your feet in them. Put like half a cup of Epsom salt, which is a magnesium sulfate, helps relax the muscles. Actually, taking magnesium in general, even intaking it at nighttime, also helps. Magnesium and calcium are pair minerals in the body. Calcium is what helps contract the muscles. So when you flex your bicep, you have these things called actin and myosin, which are like the fibers of the muscle, and calcium is what helps contract them. Right? So if you want to have like bodybuilders, they should be getting a lot of calcium to help that full contraction. But they also need magnesium to help relax the muscle properly. Because if you're not allowing the full relaxation of the muscle, then you can't do another rep, a full rep. You're like releasing halfway, then you only have 50% to do the next rep. Right? And a lot of us, they fortify calcium in orange juice now and milk. So we're kind of calcium rich, more than not, more calcium rich, and magnesium deficient. That's why people are really tense physically. These types of tension in the body. That if you take magnesium, you can get more free-flowing, more at ease. The joints more supple, the muscles are more relaxed. And it changes their nature. When the body is more supple and easy, the mind is more easy. Your nature is more easy. When you're like, just do it. Just like flex your body, every muscle. See how it feels. Your whole nature is this. I feel like I want to attack somebody. It's just like, this is what happens, And when you're just like relaxed and just chilling, alhamdulillah, shukr. You want to give people hugs and stuff, So I encourage magnesium at night as well. I have this thing called, it's a powder called Natural Calm. I put 2 teaspoons at night around bedtime. An hour before bedtime, 8, 9 o'clock, and that helps. It's about 350 milligrams. I encourage that. So these are tips, inshallah. But I encourage people to get as much sleep as they need. Even like if it's 8 hours, bismillah. Let it be 8 hours. Because if you're getting 8 hours and you have the 16 hours of like full vitality, it's worth it. Instead of getting 6 and then you're, dragging your feet half the day and so forth, and unhappy and depressed and cranky and not doing your job properly and acting off on people and stuff. Like, it's get the 8, for God's sake. For you and other people, get the 8. But some people need 7, and as you age, you need less. It is what it is. Yes, please.
So regarding the holistic medicine, I know that there's a lot of benefit in like flax seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that using them externally and using the benefits that way is as beneficial as ingesting it internally and getting benefits that way?
How would you use it externally?
In your hair, your skin.
Oh yeah, exactly, no problem. Yeah, there's no negative side effects. It's habbatul baraka, right? So these are things that, especially with your intention, and this is true. And I really believe this. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that black seed is a cure for everything but death.
Yeah.
Now the Hakims had not an issue with the hadith, but they said that's a contextual hadith to one circumstance. Like, we know now that black seed is not a cure for everything. Like, you can give it to anybody, and if they have arthritis and stuff, it's not gonna necessarily cure them. But here's where it changes. If you do it, if you take black seed out of faith and love of the Prophet ﷺ, then you unlock the fullest healing benefits, of the black seed, which is the love of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what heals. Because the black seed has certain, just like every herb, every seed, every remedy, has certain indications and contraindications, in places where it's effective and places where it should be avoided. And same with black seed. But there's something about habbatul baraka. When you have it, and you just, the Prophet, Sadaqa Rasulullah. He told the truth. It's the cure for everything. And you believe that, it becomes that through your intention. And I encourage people to do that. And I encourage people to like, this is a good type of, prophetic medicine. That you take that because the Prophet said so, and that's just it. And it just also happens to be something really awesome for COVID, which is amazing. Right? This happens to be like the certain constituents and stuff like that, the anti-parasitic kind of effects of it are really helping with COVID. So alhamdulillah. Yes, sister.
So you talked about the importance of eating whole plant foods, and shopping organically, and buying from the L in the grocery store,
Yes.
that sort of thing. But I guess my question is, what advice would you give to people who don't have a lot of resources to buy and shop organically, because it is more expensive
Totally.
typically than the conventionally farmed foods? And then also for people who are maybe intimidated for going into spaces like farmers markets or Whole Foods or these expensive stores that are really marketed more towards wealthy people.
Yes.
What advice would you give for people in those positions, and also people who maybe they're trying to make a change in their family or their culture as far as diet, nutrition, and
Yes.
all of that sort of thing goes?
Honestly, the best thing I would recommend is get some pots, get some soil, get some seeds, and plant your own food.
Yeah.
Just start small. It doesn't have to be anything big. Get some basil, get some mint, get some tomatoes. You can grow lettuce. These things grow really easily. There's certain things that grow really easily. And you can go on YouTube, and there's a lot of resources on YouTube on how to start your own home garden, even in an apartment in the city. There's whole channels with millions of subscribers and a lot of resources on how to start small on a budget. That's what I encourage. That's the new horizon. It's not depending on big pharma. Amazon bought Whole Foods. Right? Amazon bought Whole Foods is compromised as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Amazon bought them out. Like now, if you can buy Whole Foods on the Amazon app, and they deliver it to your house. They bought them out. So they're not reliable anymore as far as I'm concerned. They sold out. Farmers markets are a good bet, but I understand that there's intimidating factors and so forth. Start at home. Start at home, and honestly, find like-minded people here, and you can share seeds. If one of you I want to grow a lot of tomatoes, and then another person says I want to grow a lot of this, and I want to grow certain types of herbs, right? And you guys can share. It can be kind of like a Muslim farmers market where you guys come together here at the masjid, maybe, for example, or something like that, and bring what you've been growing. And you can sell it, or you can trade and barter and stuff like that. And that's something that I would really encourage people to do. Right? It's a very low cost. Seeds are really cheap. Pots, soil, whatever. And you're not spraying it with stuff at home. Hopefully, just putting water in it and stuff. So that's what, ideally I encourage, inshallah. And I mean, hopefully, we have to have our own solutions ultimately. We can't depend on the system. Moving off the grid, I don't know what that means exactly, but getting more self-sufficient as an ummah in our communities. Like the Muslims, the garden here, I see so much potential. And I love that. The masjid yesterday in Hillsborough, they had 4 acres, and they're talking about gardening and stuff there. Beautiful. That's the next 10 years now. That's what we have to do next 10 years: is land, animals, water, securing water, wells, securing food, animals. Because if God forbid something happens to the food supply, which, Allahu Alam, I mean, I'm not a doomer. I'm actually a little bit of a doomer, but but we have to be realistic. We have to see things happening on the horizon. We can't be dim and kind of plastically optimistic. We have to be real. And it could be very well that a food supply obstruction happens in the next year or two. What do we do then? We have to have solutions. So this becomes something that feeds into another bigger issue, and something that I would give same advice to. Become self-sufficient, inshallah. Allah give us tawfiq. Thank you. Good question.
Yeah, I just had a question about what you would recommend in terms of how people should approach food tests, especially things like the Carroll test. My understanding is that it's kind of more genetic based. So the results. I know naturopaths will sometimes say like if you get a result like you're intolerant to something, like just cut it out completely for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And just wanted to see like what your perspective is on that kind of approach.
Yeah. So the Carroll test is a test that I run as well. It's a food intolerance test. It's actually not a genetic test like we're checking the DNA.
Okay.
It's a bioenergetic test. I can't really speak much more than that about it because it gets too technical, but we're checking a blood sample for what foods it doesn't resonate with.
Okay.
If you will.
Yeah.
It's kind of as far as I can go. So it's a bioenergetic test. We believe it's something constitutional, meaning genetic. Something I check my children, for example, for their food intolerances, and I check them years later, and they're the same. They tend to not change.
Okay.
And so these are different than food allergies. Food allergies are things that can change. You can check if you're allergic to peanuts or soy eggs, and you have certain antibodies and IgG, IgM, IgA kind of antibodies, and they spike, and you can do certain things to actually get rid of them, to totally kind of assimilate that, your interaction with them so that you're not being triggered by them, so forth. You can do all that with allergies. With intolerances, it's not so clear.
Okay.
Some people can build some tolerance. Like, for me, like mine's potato.
Mine
So,
too.
yeah? Good. So in some way, I love potato, but I try to avoid it.
Yeah.
And that becomes something that, is important for me. And I know for sure what happens when I have potato. And there's certain things that, like for example, my energy gets zapped.
Yeah.
I can have a little bit of potato. So my food intolerance is potato, meaning I can't digest it properly. So if I have it, I don't get like headaches. I don't get like skin issues. Some people do. Mine is that I actually I go into that food coma. I have to sleep. It's like imagine I had like a whole turkey, like I'm like okay, now I'm gonna go sleep. I get that if I have like a handful of potatoes, and I can have like 2 heaping plates of something else with not potato, and I can go play with my kids afterwards.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what happens to me. My energy gets zapped. So that's why I know I need to avoid that. Right? So that's something that, it's lifelong. But I've found that I can have like, with potato, like there's certain additives and stuff that are potato based. If I have a little bit of that, it's not so bad. But it's like gross potato becomes a problem.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm curious where you did it. You did
Actually,
it?
my wife's naturopath that did it for me, but
Good.
yeah.
I'm curious who it is. There's a Carroll network of practitioners. We'll talk later, inshallah.
Elizabeth Wade is her name. She's
Elizabeth?
in Portland.
Elizabeth Wade.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I trained with her
Okay.
in
From
Spokane.
Chicago.
She's from Chicago,
Yeah.
but I was in Spokane with her 2 years ago. I trained with her. Interesting. Small world. Small world, mashallah. Good. Good for you guys. Mashallah. What else? Any other questions? MashaAllah. Well, I'm really grateful to have shared, inshallah ta'ala, a little bit about, we can go, this is a whole course or a whole weekend or something, inshallah ta'ala, maybe one day we can do something like that. But these are things that, again, so vital, how we start these kids, learning about. And us, it's not too late for us to also learn and embody, because I found, wallahi, the body is adaptive. The ruh is, as long as your ruh is in the body, there's hope. Wallahi, that I've seen people make changes in their lives late in life and transform their lives with intention, with resources, with the tawfiq of Allah Ta'ala, and grow in ways that they haven't grown in decades. Using these types of medicine, using the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, using the power of intention, asking Allah Ta'ala the dua for tawfiq and tahajjud, and Allah gives them that tawfiq. So these are things, inshallah Ta'ala, we ask Allah to help us all in learning and embodying and continuing to pursue, inshallah Ta'ala, in our own lives. I'm happy to be of service and support for all of you, inshallah Ta'ala. If there's anything I can do, marhaban, you're welcome to reach out to me. forwardtohealth.com is where you can reach me.
Yeah.
Yes, brother.
Thank you very much.
Alhamdulillah.
First of all, I'll give the Imam, if the Imam wants to say something. If he doesn't, I'll say something on behalf of.
Bismillah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mari. My name is Hakim Jabi.
Hakim.
Yes.
Allahu Akbar. That's a sign. It's a big sign.
Alhamdulillah.
You don't need to have me come if you have someone named Hakim. What are you guys doing having me come?
On behalf of the masjid, on behalf of our brothers and sisters, we thank you very much
Alhamdulillah.
for sharing your knowledge with us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take you back to your loved ones safely. This masjid, take this masjid as your masjid.
Allah Akbar. Thank you.
Whenever you're in Portland, stop by the sea.
I will. Inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hakim.
Wassalam.
Alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah. And on that note, سبحان الله وبحمده أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك صلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Assalamu alaikum. I think we're close.